I'm like, yeah,
Oh, we're
do it.
going live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Support Corner with Ghada and Zara. Today, we will be talking mainly about hellfire and how we can get over it and just the experience that we have with it. And I mean, we all know me. I'm Ghada. I'm a Saudi ex-Muslim. I try my best to normalize the existence of ex-Muslims as much as possible by talking about this. And this is hopefully going to help with that, and also hopefully to support ex-Muslims everywhere that cannot speak out. Do you have anything to say, Sarah, about
Oh, I
that?
was just gonna say, if you want to see Gada's interview on Life After Islam and her
Oh, yeah.
story, which is moving, it's on the Life After Islam channel series. Yeah, it's on the Life After Islam playlist, which should be on my channel. So yeah, go. I think after this talk, it'll help understand where we're both coming from.
Hmm.
But yeah, we can get started with the topic of hell. I
All
actually
right.
posted it on Reddit to see if other ex-Muslims wanted to join. So I might just link this back to them if they've missed it.
Hmm. So one of the things that, at least for me, and I'm pretty sure it's essentially worldwide around people that have grown up with religion, is the fear of hellfire. Is they let you know from a young age that if you don't follow the religion to the extent that they want you to, then you're going to go to hell. And then hell starts being this like boogeyman that is always on your at the end of your, it's just always there. It's always following you around. Even when you like sin, you don't feel guilty for doing it, but you fear that maybe
Yeah.
you're going to go to hell to do it. At least
Yeah.
that was how it is for me.
Yeah, no, I think I was the same with the fear of hell. I actually wanted, like in my last years, the only reason I wanted hell to exist was so that men rape women, and there were so many cases. I think I was watching it on like crime shows and TV, that there were so many cases, a lot of men would just go unpunished. And I was like, there has to be a hell that exists for these men that hurt
Mhm.
women and are not punished, because surely a god wouldn't let that happen, right? But
Yeah.
then, like, there was a fundamental problem in the first place, because it always crossed my mind that why would a god in the first place make this happen? Like if he really cared about it and if he did exist, why would he let this girl be hurt? And sometimes rape victims would commit suicide or are not allowed to get an abortion in some countries, and they would end up committing suicide. Um,
And it's not just that. I mean, you hear about all of these horrible people in the
yeah,
past, and also, when you're a victim of abuse, like me, for example, you feel like maybe, the people that have abused me deserve hell. But do they really deserve eternal hell? Eternally being roasted alive, then your skin be taken out and put new skin on, and then tortured again and again and again? Is that really merciful? Is that really necessary? Do I really want that even to the most horrible person out there?
yeah. I know. I guess I was going to ask you a question. Look, as we know it, hell largely exists in the concept of Abrahamic religion. So if we are going to judge somebody in our head in terms of who would go to hell, did you gotta think that people who were born in a different religion weren't on the right path and they would go to hell? Or did you think that they would be judged accordingly at the end of time,
Well,
to see if they were good people?
I'm going to ask you that same question too.
Yeah.
But before I start asking you this question, so for me, it really depended on what timeline this was. So
Hmm.
when I was younger, it was like my mother telling me that this is happening and this is what the truth is, and then I believed, yeah, sure. And like people, even Sunnis can't go to heaven. Can't go to heaven. They're going to
Hmm.
hell because they reject certain things. But then as I got older, this is more towards high school time when I was still Muslim, but a little bit more liberal, I started to realize, like, yeah, I think that if a person is good and still believes in God, they'll go to heaven. I mean, God only said that there was only one sin that he doesn't forgive. Everything else is forgivable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in my head, when I was young, I didn't think about it as much. But as I grew older, and this is in my teenagers too, when I went, when I lived overseas and was exposed to a lot more non-Muslims, I thought that even if you are a non-Muslim, you're going to eventually end up in heaven. And I didn't know the concept of eternal hell because that just sounded scary to anybody. I mean, at the same time, as much as I thought about rapists going to hell, I didn't want them to go to eternal hell. But I wanted them to suffer, but then at the same time, there has to be a threshold to how much that crime should be paid. And that's what I considered a disbelief in Allah, like specifically. Um, in terms that would be a sin that they would go to hell for a bit and then eventually they would end up in heaven, and that's how I saw it. And that's why, when somebody asked me a question and I was 17 and I was in university and I was wearing a hijab, and I obviously was listening to music, or I was with my boyfriend, and somebody asked me at the time, because obviously you're not allowed to have relationships, but he asked me and he was like, "Do you think that all non-Muslims are going to go to hell?" And I looked at him and I didn't have an answer because I was like, hang on, whatever I say, I'm a representation of Muslims to him. So I have to be careful. And I'm like, no. And I didn't know that that was a concept. Like, I didn't know that eternal hell, like I said, existed.
So
And
what were you taught about hell as growing up? I mean, because you grew up in Tanzania, and even though you
yeah,
went to Islamic schools, they were still a lot different. Like at least from what I understood
yeah.
from you about religion classes. So what was it that? How did you learn about hell, and how was it taught to you?
So I know when we wouldn't eat, like when I wouldn't finish my food, my mom would say, "Well, you can't go to heaven if you don't finish your food." But things like hell, where you're going to go to hell or you'll burn in hell, and I was never taught about eternal hell. I wasn't taught that you would definitely be in hell. So even when they taught us about hijab and you're hanging by your hair, the threads of the hair strings, and um it was never eternal. It just felt like for a time being. I don't, maybe I had missed it, or maybe I think in a wishful world, I didn't want to accept that there was an eternal hell. And I was like,
Yeah.
technically, it makes sense that if I sin, I should be punished for it, but not forever, because ultimately I'm a good person. I give charity, I pray, or even if I skip prayers, I still have a connection with God, and nobody should judge that, and God will forgive me. And, ultimately I'll end up in heaven because, there are people who've committed horrible crimes, and why would I be in the same space as them?
Mhm. So how did you feel? So you left Islam,
Hmm.
and did you still feel that fear of hellfire when you first started leaving, or when you
Uh,
first left?
no, I think when I left, the clash that I had with my previous life and my new life now was identity more than it was heaven and hell. It was more like, who am I now? But in the process of me leaving and how I rationalized hell while I was growing up, when I was actually fearful of it, it was I think I always rationalized, um, when I used to read, there as a Shia, we used to read the Munajat of Imam Ali when he dies, and there was this passage where you're like, and you're the sinner. So as human beings, you're the sinner, but he is the most merciful one, and
Hmm.
nobody can be. And it was just like praising God over and over again. And in my head, I was like, well, I mean, why would a merciful God put me in hell in the first place? Why would he
Yes.
do that?
And
Um,
how is it merciful? So, my mother, one of the things that she told me when I came out, and well, I didn't come out, when she essentially made me go out and let everybody know. Anyway, she told me that hell, the concept of eternal hell, when I asked her, like, do you really want me, your only daughter, the one that you supposedly love, to go to hell for eternity? And she's like, well, this is the mercy of God. This is justice. How on earth is this justice? I'm not a killer. I'm never raped anybody. I've never stolen anything. All I wanted was for me to be able to live my own free life, and then apparently this is justice. This is
Yeah.
merciful. How is this merciful?
Yeah. And especially with removing my hijab and what we've been told about hijab, and I'm like, but it's my hair. Like, why would I be punished for my hair? And I remember, like, while I took off my hijab properly at the end of my, it was I think 2000 and something. It was 2012 or 11, at the end of 2011. Before that, when I used to go swim, I wouldn't wear my hijab because you can't swim. And we didn't have swimming hijabs in Tanzania. So you couldn't swim because you just drown, or like when you're on slides, and I'm like, I'm not wearing it. And my family was okay with it because they knew you were swimming. But at the same time, I was like, I'm actually having fun. I'm spending time with my family. I'm being protective of myself so that I don't get hurt, swimming with a hijab. Why would God punish me for that? This is
Mhm.
my hair. I am doing nothing. I am not, people look at me, but I am not committing a crime. So why would God punish me for it? And that I felt like hell was used basically to instill fear onto people. But in my head, at a young age, I was like, but if you're going to go to hell for everything, then what is categorized as, we do have major sins, but what is categorized as major or minor in terms of like somebody removing the hijab or somebody telling a white lie?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, because it's white, the removing the hijab is considered a big sin. It's not a
mhm,
small sin because hijab is mandatory, even if a lot of Muslims continue to say that it's a choice. It's not a
yeah,
choice. The other thing, and people here are asking, oh, so one of the guys is saying that Allah loves you more than a mother and her loves her own child. Have you heard that when you were
yeah, I
growing
know.
up?
Yeah, yeah. I was told that, but my mom never told it to me. Like
Mm.
I was told that in madrasa, and then I
Same.
was also like the heaven lies on the feet, like under the feet of your mother, and I'm like, that's great, and I was like, that's awesome. But then that also put a lot of restriction or burden on me to never say no to my mom, to
Exactly.
never not do what she doesn't want me to, and I think that was really difficult because then that kind of teaches people to lie.
Yes,
Like,
because
are
you
you
don't want
exactly?
because you don't want to say no to your family because part of it is that you will go to hell if, for example, that's something my mother used to always tell me that if she dies and or I die and she isn't happy with me, that she doesn't approve of the way I live, then I will for
Yeah,
sure go to hell and I will never see heaven. But what kind of mother would want to do that to her own daughter or her own son? Like,
yeah,
how are you? But and again, and to go back to the hellfire, it is essentially used just to scare people because a lot of religion, it doesn't make sense. The prayers are boring. The fasting is, and all of the other things that you do, and you don't want to do them. But the only reason you do them is because you're afraid. Because, like, what if this is actually true?
yeah.
There is a hell. Like, maybe heaven isn't the best place ever, but I don't want to go to hell.
Yeah, and I guess we'll discuss this in more details, but what about the concept of this is a test when anything bad happens? It, it
I,
it felt like it was hell on earth, and like if anything happens, you're like, this is a test so that you don't get punished later on, or um you'll be rewarded later on. I guess when we
mhm,
talk about the concept of hellfire, heaven also comes into play because I think in my head, morality was more about rewards in the hereafter. It was always
mhm.
about, am I going to do this? Does this mean I'm going to heaven? And does this mean I'm going to hell? And then things like um, talking to men. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I,
How's
I'm just talking. I am doing nothing. All I did was laugh with a colleague of mine or like um a tuition mate of mine because I sat in an only girls school, but tuition was mixed. But why would I go to hell? And there was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of guilt, and I'm like, oh my God, I did this, and I'm such a horrible person for something that was so innate to human beings, which is connection.
mhm.
Um, and it was it's crazy that religion at every point would restrict you from what hand you eat with, how you enter the toilet, what leg you exit with the house, and like at every other time you're like, there is concepts such as makruh, which is prohibited or recommended not to
Yeah,
do.
but you won't be it's not a sin if you do it. It's just
Yeah,
that God would be like, mm-mm, I
yeah,
don't like this.
yeah. But like in my head, I was like, well, I'm not making him happy, and to me, it was just like now when I think about it, like basically in this podcast, I just felt like I was so restricted, and I could never go back to that life. Um,
No, I
and
cannot either.
it's a lot of my freedom, and it's not even just the fundamental of hijab, but a lot of my freedom even in the house was restricted from me listening to music, from me like even tapping my hand to music because it's considered wrong, or like tapping my fingers, sorry. Um,
Or
and
having sinful thoughts, like starting to
yeah,
question things. Like that's for me
exactly.
when I began to fear hellfire for real is when at some point I stopped praying when I was very, very young, and my parents found out.
Hmm.
And for a long time, I was extremely scared that I was going to go to hell. This is me at like 8 and 9 years old. So I was
Yeah,
still a child.
yeah,
But my mother made it sound like, no, I mean, you know, how would they say, like, teach your children to pray at 7 and then beat them at 10? My mom didn't care. She beat us at 7. Like, no,
yeah,
you got to learn how to pray. You can't just not pray. So when she found out I couldn't pray, she kept mentioning hell over and over and over and over again, reminding us of the stories of what happens to people when when they die and don't and are not praying, the types of hellfire that you will go to, and then I was scared, like for real. And then later on, when I started questioning, even the question scared me. Like now I'm going to go to hell,
yeah,
and it scares you even more when you think about it, that there, like in the day of judgment, there's going to be, a scale that sees how much bad you've done, how much good you've done. And based on that, you can either go to heaven or hell. But what if my sins are too much and I'm not doing enough good? Or what if I just keep on canceling every single good thing that I do? If I keep on sinning, then I'm for sure going to go to hell.
yeah. Yeah, no, it was quite mind-boggling. And just before we go on to how to get rid of the fear, or strategies to be less scared of hell,
Mhm.
rather, I guess I was going to ask, do you not feel that the concept of hell and heaven is child abuse?
Extremely, because especially when I mean, and I've told you this in my story. When I was in Saudi, they would tell us, they would spend an hour just telling us about hellfire, and um, the torture you'll receive when you get there, and the torture in the grave. And as children,
Yeah,
uh, we will believe anything. You
yeah,
tell us that if you do this, then you're going to go to hell. We will be scared shitless.
yeah,
So
yeah,
how did
no.
so how did you so how was it for you to, in order to stop feeling so scared
So
about?
this was largely when I was still a Muslim.
Mhm,
And a lot of it was obviously after I was exposed to meeting more people, and that mere construct that somebody who's born in the wrong religion will go to hell was removed, because I was like, but this person's so nice. Why do they have to go to hell? I think mostly I realized that if you sinned, you could get away with it and nobody would know, as long as you're not, as long as you're not caught, right? It's with
mhm,
your subconscious. And in my head, I was like, okay, well, a lot of it has to do with guilt, like the concept of karma. When somebody did bad, my mom's like, you're going to have bad having done to you, or that you're going to be punished, if not in this world, in the world after. So a lot of it had to do with basically how I saw wrong in my head. And I
mhm,
was like, okay, well, hang on. If I'm in my room alone and I decide to think about God, or if I watch a movie, or if I listen to music, how does that affect anyone? I like music and just things like this. And I'm like, I like my freedom, or I like showing my hair, or I like putting up photos of my hair on social media. So why would I go to hell? Like, what makes me a bad person in that regard, for which I deserve hell, if I'm not hurting anyone and just going by what I want to do? And that could
mhm.
be, and that's not like I never drank, I did not have sex or anything that was so big. It was mostly like me listening to music. or me gossiping, for instance, or me being a recipient of somebody venting, which also largely consists of gossip sometimes. And I was like, well, she's venting. It's technically gossip, but she needs to let it out. And I'm like, so am I going to hell if I don't listen? Like, if I don't listen to her, I'll be hurting her and I'm going to go to hell. But if I listen to her, then I'm listening to gossip and I'm going to hell. And I'm like, there's no win-win. At
Yeah.
this point, I was like, this isn't fair. And I think a lot of it slowly came back to, and even now, like when I see movies or when I go to a store and I don't see a tag on a piece of clothing or anything. And I'm like, technically, anybody could come out with that. So why would somebody be stopped for it? And a lot of time, the concept of hell was linked to morality.
Yes.
And I was like, why would I do good or why I wouldn't do bad? And what does it have in me? So I always thought of it as a choice and consequences. And that's basically what helped me slowly get over the fear of hell. And I'm like, I am choosing to live my life to do right by myself. And I am choosing to not steal, or I'm choosing to um, not be vengeful, or, not stab somebody or anything, because they will get hurt and I will be hurt from that action of mine as well. And it's going to be part of my subconscious. And that's not something I want I guess, in my future. So that's how I got over the concept of hell. What about you?
Well, my story is a lot different than yours. For me, when I was questioning religion, I was extremely scared of going to hell. I was convinced, like, this is it. Like, I'm rejecting this religion. This God is maybe real. I don't know. And if he's real, he's definitely going to put me in hell. And I was like that for less than a year, maybe a year. And I went to therapy on a weekly basis, and my therapist was an ex-Catholic, so we understood the guilt that we grew up with.
Hmm.
So as I kept trying to understand from him, and I kept telling him that I still feel like what I'm doing is wrong. I feel like I'm a bad person, and I know I'm going to hell. Like this thing exists, and I'm going to it. And the more I said it, the more I went to him, and the more I said it, the more absurd it started sounding in my head. Because in my opinion, like I'm not a bad person. I've never killed or robbed or hurt anybody. All I wanted was to do good to people. And then when I took off my hijab, it was even worse. Um, I really thought that this is it. Like I'm going to be held by my hair and I'm going to die. It wasn't until I started talking to more people that were not Muslim and interacting with them both in real life and on Twitter that I realized like these people are nice to me. I don't think that they should be going to hell. Maybe hell isn't real. And the more I said it to myself, the more absurd the concept of heaven and hell became, especially that I hated the idea of heaven. So if I rejected heaven, I can reject hell too.
Yeah.
And that's how I got over the fear.
Yeah. I mean, I like the one thing that also crosses my mind is it's not only Muslims that have the fear of hell, other religious denominators as well have it. And
Yes.
at at the same time, like if we consider that people born in a different religion would go to Muslim hell, it's also that somebody else would go to Christian hell. And I'm like, so either way, I'm going to hell anyway. I'm going to
Yes.
some form of hell. Maybe their God is the right one, or maybe it is all one God, but because you decided not to be a Muslim or you decided to be a Muslim, you would still be going to hell. And what makes my hell I guess, any more right than anybody else's hell? Why is my truth the real truth? And that's how I guess I considered it as well. And I'd never read the Bible or anything, but I knew that Christians also believed in hell. And for the longest time, as I was coming out of religion, I was like, when it was like between Christians and Muslims, and I was like, well, it's still one God, so it's probably the same God. But little
Yeah.
do you know that this same God also doesn't like the other person.
Yeah, it's
Like
a
they
very
don't like the other
strange.
religious person. And I'm like, oh, okay. Somebody just mentioned about the hadith that says that most of the inhabitants of hell were women.
And that is one of the other things that bothered me about religion is that we learned this hadith in school, And they tell
Yeah.
us, oh, it's because, women are ungrateful. I'm like, but men marry over their wives that have dedicated their entire lives
Yeah.
to them. And then how is that not ungrateful? Why isn't he going to hell?
Yeah. And it's, I mean, a lot of times it just felt like, and I know somebody would have probably brought this up, but it was, I think, okay, so the concept came from somebody had mentioned it on Twitter or Instagram, where women have more power than they think they have. And I think that person was telling, it was in a sexist context, where the person was like, because men always want to have sex and women hold the power to give it to them, they can basically manipulate them. And in my head I was like, do women go to hell because they hold all the power so they can make a nation or break a nation? um, and I was just like, well, if women hold so much power, is that why they go to hell? Like, but then in the reality of in the reality, um, women weren't given as much power, especially
No,
in homes, and even just like looking at the outcome of how many women are in the government, in any government, it's not equal. So I'm like, well, clearly they're not in as much power. But that played up a lot in my head, and it just felt like, did I was I born a woman? And then getting my period as well felt made me feel like I was, I was sinning, or I was impure, and that's why I'm going to hell. There was a lot of self-blame with just me being a woman. And
I,
there was
I,
definitely a time where I wanted to be a boy, and this was like when I was 10 or 11.
yeah. I think in the last few minutes, if anybody has any questions,
Mhm.
please let us know, and we will answer.
Yeah.
Somebody actually mentioned that. Where is it?
Somebody wrote, if your family were not strict Muslims, would you have been Muslims today?
I really don't know.
Well, my family isn't.
Depends.
Yeah, my family isn't as strict. Even if I was raised conservatively, I was still, I guess I was let go at the age of 16. So I still did what I wanted to do, and I still found my own way out, and they've accepted it. They've learned to accept it. So I don't, like, in my case, it just would not have mattered.
Hmm.
Does anybody else have questions?
And did anyone want to share a story?
Yeah. I was going to say,
Especially from
when
a
we,
Christian point of view, because I haven't had a lot of, I mean, I've had mainly the Catholic point of view, not the Christian point of view. Not that, in my
yeah,
opinion, they're the same, but whatever.
in like, I feel like all
All
religions have
religions.
some baseline, and then you're like, Islam's like, I'm just going to be a little more crazier than you. I'm going to take the next step.
I think
Um,
somebody mentioned that they think that walking away from the Christian faith was a bit a walk in the park. It might be that for some people, but I have met people that have unfortunately been ostracized because they left religion.
Yeah, and Jehovah's Witnesses a large group, but there are also some smaller cults that still believe in Jesus and call themselves Christians. And obviously, they have more stricter rules. They're not big in numbers, and this could be a cult of maybe even 200 people or 200,000 people, and not 2 billion. So I
Hmm.
think like smaller cults definitely can have it as, I guess, as not as, but even worse than Islam would, even the conservative side of Islam, or like the
Hmm.
fundamentalist side of Islam. Um, I remember this girl was from New Zealand, from a cult, and she talked about how when a woman would score higher grades and her teacher said that she is bound to be a leader,
Hmm.
the grandfather got really mad at her. It's like, we don't want learned women.
Wow.
Yeah, and she came out of the cult. Basically, she had never seen the outside world. She had never spoken to anybody from the outside world, um, and she was only allowed to study primary school. And
That's really
yeah,
sad.
yeah. And I
There's a
think to them, religion was just spread. Not spread, sorry, the religion wasn't as spread, but it was enforced heavily on those people who are religious.
Mhm. Final question. Let's see. Why did you fear eternal hellfire? Isn't there in Islam a concept of hell with only a limited period of time? Well, I feared it because it was essentially indoctrination. You know, I was told that there was going to be a hell if I don't do something, and it's a scary thing being burnt alive for eternity. And for the second part of the question, there
That's what
is
I
that
thought.
concept that that there is that concept where you do go to hell
Mhm.
and spend cleanse your soul from all of those sins that you have done. But if you have not committed the ultimate sin, which is not believing in God, you would at some point go to heaven, and
Yeah,
your sins are washed away from you.
and I guess that's what I was saying before, that before I guess got rid of that fear of hell, that's how I saw every sin as being punished for a period of time, and then you're like, okay, you've paid your punishment, and that could be from one day to like 1 century.
Hmm.
Somebody said, is karma a concept in Islam? Um,
No, not really. Not in the because karma would be considered shirk, because it's
yeah,
not God that's doing this. Essentially, it's God that
yeah.
is doing everything. He is the one that gives you the good and that gives you the bad.
Yeah, and I guess this, so it's not karma as such, and we didn't use that word until it was used by Hollywood movies, but it was mostly, I guess, in terms of if I did something bad, so let's say I punched Ghada and 5 days later I lost something that I really liked or I got hurt, and you're like, oh, that's karma. That's God. And then you start relating that to God punishing you. So it wasn't as such, but I think there was a lot of blame. And I feel like a lot of ex-Muslims, when they come out and anything goes wrong, they start blaming themselves and internalizing it, especially because they're
Yeah.
new and they're like, oh, maybe God's punishing me. Maybe he really does exist.
Oh, I've
Uh,
had that. I've had that so much when I first left religion, which is
yeah.
why I was so afraid to call myself not Muslim anymore for a whole year. I was like, nope, I'm still going to use that label
And some people have it for
just in
years.
case.
Some people have
Yeah.
it for years. People unlearn at their own pace. But with that, were should we end this?
Yes, we're about 30 some minutes.
Yeah,
Unless anybody has a very important question. The last few questions, I don't think that they are relevant to here.
this topic, yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, definitely. You can find Gada on Facebook. You can find me on all of their social media channels. Gada's Facebook has been linked in the description. And thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and share.
Yeah, thank
Also,
you.
Also, let us know what we can talk as suggested topics. The idea
Mhm.
is to be a support corner for ex-Muslims, but that might extend to a lot of people leaving religion or even Muslims questioning.
Mhm. Yeah, ask us anything. Ask us on Facebook, Twitter,
Yeah,
and also Instagram if you are on there. Just ask us anything. Reddit.
yeah, yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on with me.
Thank you on. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for watching and listening. And tune in next time.
Bye.